Well, it looks like we might be up. It was a little bit difficult today because apparently Twitch changed my stream key again. They seem to do that every couple of days, or every couple of weeks rather. Well, I say that we're up, but who knows. Ah, there we are, Good. Let's go ahead and tell the world about it. And streaming some concept art today. Indie dev paste. And we're going to go ahead and pop on over to various other places and post the same thing over and over again. Exciting stuff, I'm sure you'll agree. So today what we're going to do is we're going to actually try to make our game look a little bit better, but the big hurdle is we have to figure out how we are going to display damage. This whole game takes place in a giant debris field. Huge ships and space stations that have fallen apart. So how do you create debris? Well, we've already blocked out the kinds of debris we need in terms of the shapes and the layouts, but we don't have any concept for how it's actually supposed to look. Erdroy stops in to say hello. So today what we're going to do is we're going to do some concept art. We're going to try to figure out how this debris should look by just talking a little bit about various kinds of, visuals that you can use for debris. So that's why we have our art program. I don't think we're going to get to any programming today. I doubt we'll even get to any 3D modeling today because there's a lot to conceptualize, and so that's what we're going to focus on right now. Okay, so if we're going to talk about kinds of debris, there are lots of different kinds of damage that take place. There's also lots of different kinds of things that can be damaged. Let's go ahead and start with the idea of how we would rip up the surfaces of these objects, because when you look at spaceship damage, you often find that it's mostly surface damage. So if we're talking about surface damage, that's not black. That is like beige. Surface damage. Yay. So if we have an intact surface, that's fine. So you have like, hull plates like this, right? But there are lots of different kinds of things that can happen to tear up the hull. So you could have a situation where the hull gets blown out from inside like this. And then there's something down here that's explosive or whatever. So it's like blown out. And if you can think of some that I haven't gotten to, feel free to make your suggestions. It's not a very pretty blown out, I'm afraid. It doesn't look so great, but just trying to get the basic idea in my memory before you move it any further. We've got the ripped version where it gets hooked and then torn, so it looks like this. Something like this, right? Call that the what we'll call it, the ripped up. Ripped is fine. We of course have the age-old classic of the punch down or burn down, where the whole segment gets just burned in and pushed in. There's a lot of different kinds of situations where this can happen. So you might have like a cut like that, but you could also have something much simpler, like a divot, where it just gets bowed inwards, and then maybe it gets punched through right up here. And we'll go ahead and try and make it a little clearer. It's been a while since I've sketched like this, so I'm not entirely sure that I'm making a lot of sense with my sketches, but as long as they work for me, I guess that's fine. So we'll call this the punch down. Of course, there's also when you simply have missing whole segments, so they're just like floated off somewhere. Missing. Let's see. I know there are lots of more types. Let's go ahead and just keep spelling them out here. There is the kind where you get crinkled up and maybe ripped, but it's not upwards. Something like this. We'll call it crumpled in or pushed back. Crumpled. Erdray says, I've been off for a weekend in the countryside, lots of woods, so he's collected lots of mushrooms. That's great, as long as they are not poisonous. I hope you know the difference. I don't. So this sort of thinking where we try and figure out what kind of damage can happen to the surface of these elements, and I mean this isn't including things like burn marks and stuff, but basically when we talk about what sort of surface damage we have, that allows me to determine what kind of visual the player is going to immediately see looking at the top layer of this damaged object. All of these have different characteristics, and I think I'm missing one or two. Because I'm just kind of going off the top of my head here. I mean, obviously, there's also the one where the surface is partially attached rather than correctly attached. So that would be something like that, you know. Floating. But we also need to have things that get damaged in more interesting ways. So for example, if we are going to talk about structural damage, we need to come up with different ways that things get structurally damaged and how that looks. So obviously, if you've got something like a circle like this, you can tell how it's been damaged structurally by things that are not just surface damage. So for example, you might have a smashed in element like this. Smashed. Or it might be that it's been crushed together like this. Crushed. Or maybe it's been ripped apart like this. I call this like stretched damage. Overstretched. That's what we'll call it, stretched. And we've got cleaved or cut. And let's see, what other kinds of surface damage might you have? Well, it might have caused itself some structural damage. So for example, it could have ruptured, so you'd have something like this. Or it may have suffered a more cataclysmic rupture, and it's substantially more blown open, something like this. Cataclysmic rupture. So these kinds of structural damage are going to be what we apply to otherwise intact ship pieces. So for example, an engine that's floating through space, we will go ahead and smash it down with these. Now let's just make sure that this is up on the other screen. Sorry if this is more boring than usual. I'm about to start actually doodling, but I need to figure this stuff out before I start. The last thing we need to figure out is the kinds of debris attachment points, because we've got debris scattered throughout the region, right? So we'll go ahead and just write connections. if I can get my fingers to work. So for example, you can be connected to a piece of debris by having another piece of debris punch through it. Skewer. And then you might have something like press. Something like chain connect, something like this. Trail. And you have cleave, which is similar to skewer, but it comes down through like this. You know, you can have all these connections between the different kinds of debris. And of course, we also have debris that radiates from the ship object itself rather than coming from outside. You get something like floating elements, that sort of stuff. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and doodle ourselves some random pieces of debris that we might run into as we are flying around. One of the things I've done in Blender is I put together a 3D model of an engine which looks something like this, right? And when you get this engine attached to a ship, you know, it could look pretty cool because you'd have this giant ship here and we got tons of engines and they all look great. But when it's a piece of debris, it's not going to be attached to the ship quite so tightly, or not necessarily. These ships are quite large, so your, you know, mobile reclamation ship is probably about this size, right? So when you're here at this engine, it's a substantial piece of your size. You get there and you see it, like it fills the screen and you can go all around it. Because of that, it's necessary that this engine have some interesting damage to it that lets you have an interesting interaction with it. And when we think about it, the two places this engine can attach are up here on the flat surface and here on the anti-engine surface, right? But if we're talking about how it is in space, it's not going to be directly connected to those things anymore. Instead, what you're going to have is you're going to have connections that have been damaged or trailed off, and they are going to go back over towards some other element of the ship, whether they're still actually connected or whether they're just random pieces of debris. Either way, they're going to lead off in a direction, and that's going to give the ship, that's going to give you, the explorer, some sense of directionality. It's not just something floating in space. There is some sense of connection to the surrounding areas, and because of that, that debris should generally go off in a direction and not just go straight up, right? Because if it goes straight up, you're going to have a real hard time figuring out which direction that actually means. It's only if it goes straight back from the place where it's attached, that's only one direction. But if it goes off to the side, then it's both the direction where it's attached and one other direction, which clears it up rather nicely if the player is, you know, trying to figure out, you know, make sense of where they are and what's in various ways. They can orient themselves based on two directions, the top of the engine and the direction of the broken cable. Whatever sort of, you know, details. This sort of thing really helps to orient yourself when you're in zero gravity, and there's lots of random things that can happen and stuff. So you'll get stuff like this where the connection is obviously broken and twisted, and you just have a trail of debris leading off in a direction. And that'll be your cue as to where to go next or where you're coming from. Because obviously if you're over here on the big ship, you can follow the chain over, and if you're over here on the thing, you can follow the chain to the big ship. It gives us a sense of directionality. But that's not the only kind of damage that we want, because while this gives us a sense of directionality, it doesn't give us something to investigate. Sorry, that was probably very loud. So we don't have any concept of something interesting at this engine. It's just an engine. In order to make the engine interesting, we have to give the player access to something they can interact with. And the idea here is that you're not trying to reclaim the base elements here. You don't care about reclaiming the hull and stuff like that, because there's all sorts of stuff like that around. You only care about the really expensive, hard-to-manufacture parts. Things like high-quality electronics, stuff like that. So if you're trying to salvage from an engine like this, there's going to be stuff on the inside of the engine that you really want. So the basic idea here is we want to display the interior of the engine in a way which is fun for the player. And we also want to give it preferably two ways of getting in, or two different breaches that the player can investigate. Because that way they're going to go to one side and then they're going to go all the way around to the other side. And that'll keep them, interested. It's not just visit the engine, do one thing, leave. It's visit the engine, take a look around. There's going to be somewhere between 1 and, 4 or 5 different little places where you can find something to do, whether it's scanning something or retrieving something. So, for example, we could say that this engine had a ruptured fuel tank in it. When it got knocked off of the ship, one of the fuel tanks ruptured. And in that case, we might end up with something that looks more like this, right? Where it's got the same cylindrical shape, but it bows out rather dramatically and it cleaves open like this. Like an alligator clip, And then maybe we'll do something cool with the bottom mount by having the bottom mount rip away and only be partially connected. Just rip. And with this sort of effect, we'll have a ruptured fuel tank right here. And some stuff in the background like this, And now with this sort of effect, what you get as the player coming in to investigate, there's also going to be some debris chain that guides you off, like I said before. So what you get when you're investigating this sort of thing is you see that there is a huge hole and you go, ooh, what's in here? And while this tank is probably worthless, it might be that you can scan it, because that kind of damage is something where there's materials science to learn. So you can scan the damaged tank, or maybe there's something near the tank, down here somewhere, where that is not damaged by the explosion. It's some kind of regulator or something. Intact high-pressure piping, who knows? And you can salvage that using your ship. But once you're done looking in here, you're going to want to, you look in here, you look over here, you look down here, you come over here, you look in here. So this one event has created a slew of scannable situations, a slew of places that you want to look into. Savex stopped in to say plus, which I'm not sure what that means, but maybe he's enjoying himself. The other thing we can do here is after we've done a major event like this, we can do minor events. For example, we can rip off some of the hull plates, which would reveal some of the underneath elements here, right? So we might have something like partial hull plate rip-off here, and then when that happens, you can look in and scan something here as well. But this isn't a structural damage element. This is just a missing a hull plates element, so it's much easier for us to put it in. And basically what I'm thinking is when we actually model this engine, what we're going to want to do is have a situation where we split the engine up into a number of different segments. When we have a major event, like a ruptured interior tank, those segments are going to end up being largely affected and will have like a hard-coded version for the ruptured tank. But then the unaffected segments will be able to apply smaller events like this one, for example. So if we were to split this up into our 3D mesh, we might see it something like this, where we've got the engine looks like this when you first get started, right? It's just a pretty basic setup. And then what we've got is we've got it split into like rear element, fore element, and tip, like this, right? So we'll have tip, fore, mid, rear. And a major event will affect any two of these, and then we can have another event happen on one of the other ones. And that will allow us to have a lot of variation. And we can make this as complicated as we'd like. We can split it in half down the middle of the x-axis and split it into left and right halves, or upper and lower halves and stuff like that. It really depends on how we want to play it. But basically, this will allow us to mix and match events. That means that we'll be able to come up with unique engines no matter how many different sort of events happen. So if we have 100 spaceships that have all been blown away, there will be some repeated elements, but any given engine will still have a new sort of look that you're going to want to investigate. We can also have some randomization. We'll have to think about it a little bit more as we actually start to model it. But basically, because we understand the kinds of damage that these engines can take, we can talk about the exact nature of what pieces get displayed in what way. So the basic concept here is one, connection. Oh, this is not a comfortable place to write. Let's go ahead and move it over just so I can get at it a little bit. Connection leads away and orients player. And that's this thing here. 2, heavy event. And then 3, filler events. Use multiple meshes and combine freely, right? So this example is just one possible example. For example, we can take the same exact idea and we can split it into a different set of events. So if, for example, we have an engine, we might decide that this engine has been smashed by something, right? And it's got some sort of smashed visual here. It's been crushed on the top, but it's largely intact down here, right? Something like this, right? And then what we have is a trail leading off from the tank, some kind of heavy cabling. And we've got some other large object that has crushed down on our engine. And that is sort of like a 2-for-1 sale. We've got two things involved here. So we've got the engine, and then we've got something else. Let's just go ahead and say, because I haven't thought of anything else quite yet, let's go ahead and say it's another engine. So it would be something like this, right? Pointed the other direction, and it's got a different setup. And it's also been smashed, because that's where it hit, right? And it's also got some connective stuff. And then, of course, the real thing is what's in between them after they've been smashed together. Have they continued to be smashed together? Are they still tightly crushed together? Or is this area now a place where the player can get in there, move aside the heavy debris by pushing it out of the way, and then scan inside of those areas? From the perspective of our modeling, we don't really care whether or not the engine got smashed by another engine, or whether it got cut away by a laser, or whatever, whatever we want to do there. This particular set of meshes would be augmented the same way, regardless of the event, if the event has the same final result. So these are simply two engines that have been arranged in a specific configuration, and that configuration tells a story, and that story is that these two engines have smashed together and have both been damaged in different ways. Player can get in there and see that damage and work with it in the same way that they could if these two engines were on their own and had suffered other damage. Of course, two engines smashing together like this doesn't make a whole lot of sense unless, like, one of the engines is still attached to a ship, or two ships collided or something. And there's nothing preventing us from having a free-floating engine and then having an attached engine, because there's nothing particularly requiring that we always detach the engines. So maybe this is actually, a full-sized ship over here. And what's happened is it has crashed into maybe a smaller or a larger ship. So from our perspective, this is still attached to the main ship, and this is free. But we can examine both of these engines in the same way from the perspective of the 3D models that we had to put together to create these engines. So when that sort of thing happens, It allows us a lot of freedom when it comes to reattaching things, making sure there's a lot of different scenarios in play. I plan to manually create at least a fair number of these, so for now we don't have to worry about randomizing things. We just have to worry about allowing these things to have their own personality and to be arranged in ways that are fun and interesting. Of course, the actual structure of these engines is a little bit mysterious. I tried to model them earlier, and I'm not really very good at coming up with how things should look on the fly. To be honest, this is already better than what I managed to do in Blender. So let's just talk about some of the other sorts of things that we might run into when we're trying to explore the ruins of a spaceship. We're talking about really big ships, right? So I've already mentioned the fact that there are a couple of different kinds of debris paths. And we've got the hard piece of debris with debris coming off of it. And this guides the player to go around, but they can still see through the debris, right? That allows the player to be pulled forward into a path of our choosing. And we've also got the cuddle pieces, which encourage the player to get really close to the piece. So you'll end up like this, right? But what we haven't talked about much is the standalone pieces, which would be like the engine or a whole ship. And these would be much larger. They'd be like this, right? And the shell pieces. Shell pieces are things like, for example, a hangar. Something huge where you can go inside and the sun won't even be able to reach you inside this thing because it's just too big. So you're like, ooh, I'm going to fly inside this place. And it's like, oh, the door got a hole punched in it, so that's why you can get in, right? But once you're inside, it's dark and full of random things, and it's very tight and conflicted and difficult to get through. So the question is, these sorts of shell areas, they are very different from the rest of the setting, and they may require a completely different set of meshes. They have some advantages because you can hide the exterior elements. You can just fade away the rest of the level once they're inside because they don't need it to be rendered anymore, so we can just get rid of that. Similarly, we don't have to render the inside of these shells until the player is inside, which will reduce the rendering budget. But making them look good from the outside and the inside is rather a difficult prospect. What I'm thinking is that the whole of the ship, the basic ship shape, something like this, for example, in a super simplified manner. If we had a hull that was like this, and it's huge, right? It's miles across. You lose big chunks of this to whatever happened. So, here your engine got ripped off and is now floating over here somewhere, right? And there's like a trail leading back. It's probably further away than that, but I'm kind of outer space. So you might have something like this, and you might have debris everywhere else, right? And then there are places where your hull will get decimated, but it won't be a shell. So something like this, for example, where this element of the hull gets ripped apart and is floating in pieces. Now the player can investigate those pieces, but it's kind of an open area in terms of still being able to see around the place. You're not really inside the ship proper, so it's not really a shell. It's just a set of cuddles. That's the parts that encourage you to come close. And those work great. We're going to have to be careful to make sure that there is an obvious entrance and exit, so something more like this would make sense, where it's obviously, come on in from over here. And if you're inside, you can clearly see where the exit is. It's go over that way and you'll get out. But what we also want is the core of the ship to be a place where you can go due to either damage or an ingress or something. But the thing is that we never want to show the core of the ship intact. And the reason for that is just because it's really expensive. Modeling a convincing intact ship is possible, but modeling 800 different interiors is a little bit tough. So what we'd like is for any time you can get into the ship proper, we want it to have been damaged enough that the interior is just a mess. So that would be something like, for example, if a laser beam had hit and carved the ship open here. You can fly in here, and you can get inside the ship, but you won't be flying around like the corridors and stuff. The corridors will be too small for you to get in. Instead, what'll happen is you'll be exploring the damage that was caused by the laser beam. You'll be going along that vector, and you'll see rooms and hallways and stuff, but you won't be able to really use them or move through them. The best you'll be able to do is scan them or salvage from them. So if we were on the interior, for example, now these interior faces could also be used for other purposes. So for example, you might have the same interior faces here. So we'll go ahead and just use them both. These interiors might look like, something like this, right? Where you've got a series of rooms that are mostly intact. But we want to make sure that they're never perfectly square onto the surface of the plane, because they've been cut kind of arbitrarily. So we're looking at pockets that are not exactly perfect. So you'll end up with something that looks like this, right? And you'll have like a hallway here. So it'll look like this. And what we'll do is we'll come back with some kind of ability to scan this area, and this here will be like pipes and life support and stuff, right? And then here we might have a room that has windows on the far side, so you might see it like this, for example. Cutting these rooms in half is a little bit difficult, so what I might do is I might end up modeling them and then using a cut. So in the core 3D model, there would be like actual rooms, and then I would slice through to create an unusual shape. But the basic idea here is that your ship would be, substantially larger than these rooms, and you would want to be retrieving parts and stuff. So here's your little arm retriever. You got little arms, yay! And scanning stuff. So you might be like, grab something from here and from here, scan something in here, and over here. And the idea here is that you can inspect every one of these rooms and poke your way through and try and see if there's anything to grab or scan. And you can just kind of slowly drift your way along these walls to try and figure out what you would like to be able to see. And this is the interior of a huge laser area, right? A place that's been ripped apart. So there might be another wall on the other side that is equally tightly done. So it might look like this, right? And then here's an elevator shaft. And more rooms. By distorting the rooms and making them tilt in ways that are obviously not square, we can allow the damage to feel really, really real. And we can also offset the player's natural sense of positioning and what makes sense. If all of the rooms are twisted and non-uniform, non-orthogonal, the player won't really get a sense that they don't make as sense. you can have things that don't make perfect sense, and the player is willing to wave it off because it's clear that things have been damaged and ripped apart, smashed down, warped. And because of that, we can overlook the fact that some of these rooms don't seem to connect right or don't seem to work right. But perhaps the biggest problem is that these rooms need to have things between them. So rooms, deformed rooms in walls need stuff between them. Now, this is the reason why this is a little bit dangerous, because all of this is super high poly. There's not really a cheap way to do this. You're going to get close to each of these rooms. We're going to need to use very aggressive level of detail work to try and make this work out. But it's a space station or a large spaceship, so your rooms are going to have stuff between them, right? You're going to have like a room here and a room here, like this. And you're going to have like, here's a bed, a space bed, and here's a space bureau, and here's a space desk with a space computer. And then down here you'll have like a video screen and a monitor, and here's like a space health device that you get in and get scanned and that sort of stuff. But between these, we need to have machinery that looks convincing. And the question here is, how do you do this without it feeling super repetitious? I'm not really sure yet. I might try to do it with something uniform and then try for something later on that's a little bit less uniform. But the key here is we're not going to be doing it like this. We're not going to be surrounding every room with a perfect border and then filling it in with piping. The reason we can't do it like that is because it'll get really, really over-regular, and it'll be difficult to wire those pipes together. So instead what we're going to be doing is we're going to be putting in like gaps, areas where you can see all of the elements below the surface. And then from here you'd be able to see the piping, but only through this element. And of course the piping might have might point into the screen. You can easily have the pipes emerge from deeper into the ship and then get cut, because this whole thing is cut. It's a cleaved area. We'll also have a lot of fun because this window here isn't probably going to be a real good window. It's going to be like ragged. It's been cut, but not by like a professional cutting device. It's been smashed apart. So we're going to have a lot of cuts there and that sort of thing. We can also have a lot of different sorts of shapes and things in the way. So we might have a shape like this where there is something that is like this, right? You got like a mesh net that is built to hold the systems together in there, but it's been torn out and it's now floating raggedly out away from the wall. Similarly, there's nothing preventing us from having these systems, the rooms themselves, have elements which are floating out into the stream. So if we have a room here, for example, what we can have is this might be someone's bedroom, right? But what we would see is like a bed floating out here rather than being stuck in the room the whole time. And you might see whatever we would like. You could even have people if we really wanted to get gruesome. You could have people that just didn't make it out. We could have, debris, clothes, whatever we would like to have floating around. And that will add a much needed sense of depth to this. Of course, you can also have things that project out and aren't just visual. You can have like physical elements that you can't really drive through. You don't want to drive through a big chunk of metal. So you might have something like the piping that you've built isn't just cut. Something that went through actually freed up the pipe, and now it's jutting out like this. And you can't just drive through a pipe that is jutting out into the area. A pipe is a substantial size. You might be able to push it away, but my thinking is that would be annoying to program. So what I'd probably do is just make it unmovable, and you wouldn't want to run into it. You'd want to go around it. But that sort of thing isn't very difficult to model, so we might as well remember that that sort of thing is something we're going to want to do in order to make this feel like it has depth. We're obviously orienting ourselves by these walls, these planes. The planes aren't necessarily flat. In fact, they're almost certainly going to be gently curved, but we don't want them to feel like they are flat surfaces. We want them to register as flat surfaces for the purposes of navigation, but we want them to have depth such that the player will understand that, you know, they need to take their time, look through the area, and not get too many duplicate elements. So if we think about this, the rooms I've got set up here are all kind of small rooms. There's nothing preventing us from having large rooms in this kind of plane. So for example, if you had, you know, lasers cleaved in this area or whatever, it's been smashed open by something. And so what have you got? Well, you've got something like the engineering room. One of the engineering rooms is here. And so that looks something like this, right? Where you've got this roughly hewn out area. And then inside is something complicated, like some kind of energy device or something, right? And maybe it's broken, and maybe it's not. Maybe it's off kilter, like it's not exactly vertical, because these ships aren't stabbed in exactly a vertical way. So it's like this, right? And maybe it's cut right here. Maybe it got cleaved a little bit too, just for kicks, right? And this is all broken because of that. Yeah, crack. And sparks. Sparks. It's fun to talk to yourself when you do this, I hope. So if you have something like this, and then you might have a smaller thing like a corridor that leads off and is much smaller and more normal sized, and you got like normal sized offices back here and stuff, right? But these large rooms are great because there's nothing preventing us from going into them, at least partially, and they can have cool things in them, like interior elements, which can be scanned and such. The fun thing about this is these interior elements can easily be pieces of other elements for other objects. There's no reason why we can't reuse this same power core to be the main power core in your ship. You know, something small can use these large elements as large elements. Because you're inside these massive, massive ships, there's no reason to create one-offs. Might as well keep using these assets. It has an advantage that you can also reuse any textures that we might have used. The meshes can't be reused because they're going to be damaged or twisted, but you can at least reuse the elements that make sense, and obviously you can model them intact and then cleave them, although that is what I tried the other day, and it was very difficult to get the cleaving to look right. So I may like just remodel huge chunks of them every time I have to, like this, for example. You don't want to try and model that by modeling the engine and then cleaving it open. You want to try and model that by creating the engine in a clean form and then just taking the front piece and the entire back end. You can remodel it from scratch. So I don't know whether or not, I don't think this is as interesting to most people as my 3D modeling or my programming, because I didn't get any viewers today, but this was necessary for me to try and figure out what the next step was, because I need to make this game start to look good. It already is beginning to feel good to pilot, but it looks like crap. In order to make it feel better and look better, I need it to have some real debris, something that looks great and feels great. So that's what I've done here, is I've just gone ahead and worked out some of the foundation elements that we're going to need. This will allow me to create the meshes I need. It looks like what I'm going to be doing is creating sectional meshes, and then as necessary adding in details. So this ship, for example, right here, this guy. Oh, I screwed that up. This ship here, you can see how it's got this cut across it. What I'd probably do is I'd model the ship in a couple of segments, and then this cut would be applied to the center segment or something. It may include an engine, it may not include an engine, but basically, anytime you encounter one of these ships, you'll see this one model, and it's got like levels of detail and stuff. And as you get closer, the levels of detail will resolve into more detailed sets of models. And then when you go in here, you'll get even more detailed models representing the actual floors that have been cut through. Well, what do you guys think if I go and start to model some of this stuff? Is anybody interested in seeing that? Let's just see what people have said. Nope. So I'm going to go ahead and do some modeling. By the way, I've been trying to fuss with the the visual of this grid, and I can't get it to do what I want it to do. So if you are an expert at polar coordinates, let me know, because I am struggling to get that to work right. There's something screwy about my understanding of polar coordinates, or maybe I'm just not awake today. But this has nothing to do with polar coordinates. It has to do with modeling junk. So we're going to go ahead and do exactly that. I think what we actually need to do is create a new file. So let's go ahead and create a new file, and we'll call this call large ship debris walls, debris interiors. And this is going to be for our interior elements, our walls. Don't delete the sun. I need the sun. I deleted it anyway. Whatever. I guess I can add the sun back in. It's not that big a deal. There. So if we're going to talk about the kind of walls that we need, we might as well start by creating the wall in question, right? So if we've got just a wall, like this, then we can scale it up like that. That's the sort of thing we're looking at, right? And we don't have a person in this, so we're going to go ahead and put in a person. We're just going to shape this cone to be roughly person-sized, and that's going to be a matter of scaling down on most axes. Nope. Nope. There we are. One of those axes like that, yeah. So that's 2 meters, which is a little bit big for a person, but like we'll go ahead and shrink it down a little bit more. There we are. Yeah. So that is roughly the size of a person. Let's go ahead and give it a material. We'll call this material electronics. Why not? We'll call this a person. There we go. So that is about the size of a human, roughly speaking. And we can use that to try and figure out the scales that we would like to use for our walls. And you can see how big our wall is. I just kind of created it randomly relative to our human. But what we really need to do is start to model some rooms. Now, this is an interesting thing because modeling rooms is actually quite difficult. But we're going to go ahead and just start real slow with some boxes that have been inverted. And that's going to be the easiest way to model a room, right? So what we're going to want to do is scale this up until it is a size that makes sense for a room. And we're talking about rooms on spaceships. They can be large or they can be small depending on your preference for spaceship rooms. You know, lots of people think that the spaceship room should be tiny. Lots think they could be big because you're building these things in space, and really it doesn't matter. You're going to have the same mass regardless, because you're either going to have that air in a room or you're going to have it in a tank, and it weighs the same amount either way. But either way, what we're going to do is we're just going to extrude down slightly like this, and then go in. And this is like the ultimate super simple room, right? That's how a room sort of looks. If we look at the size of this room in a more general context, you can see that I stupidly did not seem to keep it on the proper axis. That's interesting. Did I screw that up? No, I did. Okay. Let's go ahead. That was just a box. Let's go ahead and just do the box again. And this time we'll be a little bit more careful with how we scale our room, because I ended up making it not work out. So we'll go ahead and say it's that tall and that long and that deep. Let's extrude this down some. Extrude it in, right? Now what I've done is I've created a room that has a specific size, but what it doesn't have is a sense of a buffer between it and the next room. Well, let's go ahead and make it so we can actually see this room a little bit better by creating some material appliques. Just quickly put in some elements so we can see it without having to turn on shading. And we duplicate this room and move it up. If we wanted to, we could have them perfectly match up like this. But I've already stated that that is a bad idea. What we really want them to be is more like this. And then the space between will be for our pipes and stuff. Moreover, this room actually has been built as as just a hole. It's just a pit in a box. But when we cleave it, what we need is a box where there is some front to it. So we're going to end up doing something, something like this, where we cut through the whole thing. Oh, I'm not in edit mode, that's why. Where we cut through the whole thing like this, right? And we want that to go through the entire thing, but we want that to look right. So what we really need to do is create a set of rooms where we can stack them in a variety of ways. And we're talking about a 3D set of rooms at this point, because when we have the final version, it's going to be kind of 2D, but we need to have it so that it's 3D in terms of how it looks when we cleave it. We're not going to be cleaving it live. We're only going to be cleaving it here in the viewer, so we can clean up after we cleave it. But the end result is still going to be that we're going to need to have some kind of cleave thing. The other thing we need to be careful about is we don't want this. We don't want a wall of rooms like this, because that has no feel to it. It doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel interesting. So we're going to want to have different kinds of rooms that get stitched together in different ways. And that can include hallways, and it can include other things. So if we were to grab this room here, for example, we can turn it into a hallway. At least, visually, we can do something like this to try and make it into a hallway. We can even add in like another element, which is, a room door in the background. Something like this, right? It doesn't have to be perfect, at least not for the blockout phase that we're doing right now, but we can create a door, and that will be obviously a room now, right? It's a hallway, can't you tell? That was a bad idea to create the door, because that door is actually part of the far wall, which doesn't make any sense, so we'll go ahead and undo that. And we'll paste in I think I've forgotten how to paste because I'm an idiot. It's okay, we'll just redo it. We'll just make it a quick little door like this, just so that we have a visual for our door. There's our hall, right? And then we can have whatever we would like. We could have an area where there is no room, or I guess it would be better if we flip the room so that it was just facing the other way. Yeah. And this sort of thing can quickly lead to more interesting rooms. This room here, for example, we can change it so that it is an elevator, which we could do by grabbing this wall here, bringing it over here, and moving this up, and moving this up. And, we can just delete this room, and this room, and this room, duplicate this room. Whoop. We need to put a lower half here too. And obviously it's going to need some work to try and figure this out, but there's no reason why we can't have a room on the far side of this. It just wraps around the elevator. So you can have something like that, no problem. But you can sort of see what we're going for in terms of creating a layout that feels reasonable. As I said, the other issue here is that we're not creating a two-dimensional layout. We are creating a three-dimensional layout that we're going to cut. So this visual is not really what we want to see. If we were to create a plane, scale it up like this, and then rotate it on the z-axis, and then move it in. Something like this is a lot more the sort of thing I have in mind. Maybe even more like this. Yeah, like this, right? And then that is the sort of thing you would see. Whether or not there were more rooms over here is the question. Now, this also doesn't have the heavy interior work that we're going to need in order to make this feel realistic. So what we might do is add in some heavy interior objects. Go ahead and duplicate this guy, move him over here, move him up here, block it out, block it out. So if we were to add in a new material, which would be machinery, we can just make this machinery, boom, and that can be our heavy interior element. And we can have these as large or as small as we want, sprawling over as much or as little space as we want. And obviously these wouldn't be just flat blocks, we're just blocking stuff out. There would be some kind of material happening. Now, when I say that we want to cleave this stuff, I'm not intending to actually model hundreds of rooms and then cleave them. I'm not even intending to model a room and cleave it. I'm thinking that what we'll do is we'll come up with a cleaving visual, just a room that has been cleaved for any given kind of room. The problem with that, of course, is that it means that every bedroom would be cleaved the same way. I think that's okay. We're not planning to have so many unique meshes. I don't want to have a bedroom that's been cleaved 8 different ways. Although, now that I think about it, if I'm creating the assets, it might be better to create a bedroom which has been cleaved a bunch of different ways, because although the meshes would be different, we would be able to share the textures. We would have some savings there. It might be better if I do create a bunch of rooms and then cleave them. The problem is that's like a lot of work. Rooms are expensive. Anyway, if we take a look at this sort of thing, what we would want to do is have stuff in the gaps here. But we're not going to put it in because we're just mocking stuff up. But we would just turn this into one object like so. I think that's not entirely one object. It looks like I missed some objects like this. Did I miss anything? Nope, not good. And then we would want to cleave it and come up with a visual that works. I actually don't know whether I can just tell it to cut by another object. This is something where a relative inexperience with Blender might be an issue. Can I tell Blender to cut one object by another object? Oh, a normal edit. I didn't know you could do that. I'll have to remember that exists. Edge split. No, that's not it. Deform, cast, correct, curve, displace, hook, lattice, mesh, deform, shrink, wrap, simple deform, smooth, warp, wave. That's definitely not it. It's probably like an action. Is there like a Boolean action I can take? Let's take a look. Blender, cut an object in half. Press space and add in. Do I have bisect? No, I don't. They are telling me to use something I don't have. Okay, so it says to go tab into edit mode. Let's go ahead and just create a duplicate of this for later. It's telling me to do cut. No, this is telling me to use a cut. That's dumb. You're dumb. You misunderstood the question. Well, if you put cut through mode in, knife might work. Okay, let's try that. Knife with cut through mode. Yeah, okay, so that's actually not too bad. I didn't cut it in the right spot, but just for a test, that's not too bad. I'll go ahead and cut again from here to here. I can't even tell if that worked. It didn't appear to. I didn't press Z. Okay. Brilliant. Let's cut from here to here. There we are. And then what I can do is just delete all this stuff up here. Can I get this to be lined up properly? Come on, mouse. It's a little bit difficult. It's okay, though. We'll just go. No, that's obviously silly. We'll go ahead and just move them back. There's probably an easier way to do this, this selecting and cutting, but I don't happen to know it, not in Blender. So this is the sort of cut that I wanted to create, where you have this room that is set up. Let's go ahead and pull this into place just so that I can have this as a backdrop, because some of these rooms aren't really set up very well. So you can cut like this, and then you'll see something that's a lot more interesting than just a flat set of rooms. You'll get this cross section where some of the rooms are shallow and some of the rooms are deep. But the more I think about it, the more clearly that is going to require me to model rooms and then cut them, rather than create cut rooms. I would like to just create cut rooms, but it's pretty clear that that is not going to be easy. The worst part is that even after I create all of the rooms and cut them properly and stuff like that, it's going to end up with a situation where I can't just take the rooms like that, because I'm not doing voxel modeling. All of the interior elements are going to be missing, like they're missing here. You can see through these rooms and into a gray space that doesn't make any sense. So even after I cut them, I'm still going to have to do a lot of modeling to clean up the damn cuts after the fact, which is not great. It's going to take a long time and be obnoxious. I could use Boolean modeling, but Boolean modeling is fairly limited. Creates a lot of chaff in terms of extroverts and faces, and it's hard to create complicated objects that feel like humans would use them. Still, I know that there is a Boolean plugin for Blender, and I hear that it's pretty good. I think that Blender's default Boolean plugin is pretty crap, but I don't happen to know. I haven't used it in 4 years. So let's go ahead and look up Blender Boolean. All right, so there is a Boolean modifier. Let's just go ahead and try the Boolean modifier on for size and see how it works. So if we create a cube, no, not there, there, and then we scale it up and move it around properly. You know what? There we are. Boom, 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 boom. Not that. There we are. Duplicate this, scale it down a little bit. Excuse me. Let me go ahead and sneeze directly into the mic, you guys, because I'm sure that that is really great to hear. No, wrong way. Here we are. Now, if we were to apply the Boolean modifier here, we want to have the this guy. What is this called? Hello, what is this called? Cube 001. There we are. So we got the intersect, the union, the difference. Is the difference just not calculating correctly? Or is it just that this thing is actually visually in the way, so I can't see it very well? Yeah, there we are. So that's what we wanted. We wanted that difference. But this is a little bit difficult for us to use to create complicated objects. You can see how it takes a lot of effort to set these up as primitives. Of course, we don't have to use primitives. We could go ahead and make a more complicated object and then use booleans with it. But let me go ahead and show you some of the drawbacks to that. So if we were to create a cylinder, like so, and then we could scale it up and move it to here, for example. And then we can create another one of these booleans with a difference with the cylinder, like that. We can go over here and tell the cylinder to just hide for a while. No, that's the wrong one. There. If we look at the mesh that comes out of the far side, actually, that doesn't look too bad. Maybe they improved it. Let's try it with a sphere. I know what we'll do. We'll do an additive with that. And then we will subtract out the sphere. There we are. So now what we can do is if we apply these, and then we take a look at this mesh, it looks like they might have fixed the problem that I used to have with this. The last time I tried to use a Boolean system in Blender, it created like dozens and dozens of extra verts that it didn't need. But I don't see that in this case. I mean, it's not optimal, but that's fine. I can live with that. It's clearly going ahead and creating valid faces. Now, some of these faces aren't quads. This face is particularly awful, but those can be resolved fairly easily. I know there is also like a Boolean plugin for Blender that's apparently quite good. I wonder what it does that this doesn't do. What does this do that doesn't? If I were going to model the entire room as a Boolean, let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and delete, unhide, grab this, duplicate it, bring it over, grab this, bring it over, and then we can actually go in here and extrude back. And then we'll flip this. Boom. All right, so if we do this, and then we move this, and we move that, and we move this, do that, move it all around. Do the hokey pokey, turn yourself around. So if we wanted to cut like this, it's a little bit too sharp. One of the problems we have is we still have gaps that I put in, and that's not great. What we can do is we can take this and we can put in, or is that backwards? Let's try putting in the Boolean modifier here. And we'll go ahead and do a difference with the rooms. Let's just see how that looks. Interesting. That is actually correct. It's just that the rooms are set up badly for it. So we're going to go ahead and make it a Boolean here. So if we were to grab the Boolean with this and make it a difference, and then apply that, and then move this out, you can see that we only got the front half. So what we need to do is actually have this be on the other side. That's more like what I needed. Yeah. That's the ticket. So now if we grab this and move it back, and then move this away, you can see that we've cleanly cut through the rooms. But the problem is that there's still gaps between them. The question is whether or not those gaps are... Okay, so those gaps are clean. Okay, so if we were to create the rooms correctly, this modifier would work. We would actually be able to cut these rooms. I'm trying to get the hallways to work. They are not working. Are they really that fussy? I don't think so. I think the hallways are malfunctioning, and I'm not sure why. Let's go ahead and undo that. Do we have hallways? We do have hallways. So if we just do this and hit apply. Okay, so basically the thing I needed to make sure of is that if we did this, we could get that interior space to pretend that it exists, like this, see? So when we use cut, we end up getting a situation where our cuts end up being just the worst because they actually reveal massive amounts of empty space. But if we use a Boolean operator and we set up our rooms correctly, we should be able to actually cleave the rooms in half and fill in all of those gaps. I don't know if the Boolean operator is up for that kind of incredibly complicated work. Because, I mean, there's lots and lots of edge cases involved, and I'm not at all sure that it's working as it's supposed to. But let's go ahead and set this up with the idea that it might try to do that. So that just means that we're going to be putting in a lot of this filling. Like this, right? Because I'm not sure how it will act when it comes to non-manifold meshes. And I can model the rooms to all be manifold, but it is kind of obnoxious, so I prefer not to if I can avoid it. Apply, pull it back. Let's see. Okay, you can see that the non-manifold meshes are getting screwed up. So we can't do this with non-manifold meshes because it seems to misunderstand the topology. It understands it correctly. But you can see it shaved away my opaque faces rather than filling them in. And I think that's because of the non-manifold setup that we've got going. We've got these faces that are kind of just floating, and then we've got these room elements here. Basically, we don't want to model the outside of the room like I've done. The outside of the room should be in more model. It should be the gaps between this and the other sets. Alboechi stopped in to say hello. So what we need to do is when we model these rooms, we need to be careful to model the interiors and then connect up the exteriors in a manifold way so that when we Boolean modify them, it carves them rather than just filling them, or rather than just deleting them. Now we can also put pockets in, and those will get cleaved open, and that'll be nice. So what this really means is that I've got a lot of modeling to do. I have to model maybe a dozen rooms and a dozen or 24 elements that go between rooms. And that's just to get a start. And I'm not sure that I want to do that today. I wonder if there's a fast way to fake this for now. And I think there is. If I were going to just fake it, what I could do is just create boxes like this. Make them roughly the right size. Scale Z up, scale X, scale Y up. And scale X up. There. Add in an array modifier like this. Change it so that it's y-axis 3 and z-axis 3. No, y-axis 3 and 2.5, something like that. Yeah. 2.2. There we go. And we can give ourselves a bunch of them. Yep. And then what we can do is apply another array modifier to give us a vertical array. 1.2, 1.8, 2.2. There we are. More than that, how about 2.6? That's better. And then we'll just create a wall like this. And that should do. Go ahead and apply. Go in here and like delete some of them, just arbitrarily, right? Just doesn't even matter which ones. Just grab some and delete them. Yeah, delete faces is fine. Delete more of them. That's too many still in existence. That's not too bad. All right. So with that in mind, what we can do is move this into position without any rotation. Like this, right? We can bring this down, imprint it in like a stamp, and then rotate it to give it a little bit of that feeling of being properly tilted. Now, all this said, I have no idea how to actually create a version of this that has some slope to it, that's been crushed down. I might do it manually using just moving verts and having connected, move all connected. We'll see. So if I add a Boolean here and I tell it to give me the difference between us and this random block of boxes, and then I apply that and pull it back, you can see that this is the sort of shape that we're looking to get. Not even. Undo. Undo. There we are. Because I forgot to rotate it like this. And then bring it down like this. Now we can do it. Boom. Error. Modifier is disabled. Did I disable it on accident? How do I re-enable it? Okay. There you are. Here we are. So that's what it looks like. Now we hide this. So this is what I sort of want the effect to be when you're flying along it. You're like, come on, shift. Whoom. Like, oh look, there's something in this room. Scan. So I can probably use a surface like this for now. I can probably go ahead and fake it like this. Just to get something that works. But that's just like a bare minimum. Well, let's go ahead and try and edit it with a slump. We're going to try and put in a slump. You can see the issue here is that we have got radically n-gonned faces. You can see this face here has tons and tons of weird-ass verts. So in order to edit it in the way we need to edit it, we're going to need to triangulize it, which is one of these. There we are. Let's go ahead and use the beauty method. There we are. That's better. Now we have a whole bunch of verts that we can modify. It's not ideal because this could have been a lot more. Let's go ahead and put in some cuts here. Why can't I cut this face? You're not letting me cut this face? I should have cut it before I did any of the operations, shouldn't I have? Well, that's fine. Yeah, that helped some. If we turn on proportional editing and we grab a vert like that one, well, I guess a whole line will work. We just make it big like this. We can slump the whole thing. But you can see that these long edges end up causing us some trouble. See how that ends up causing us trouble? To be honest, I'm not too concerned. Those long edges are... The trouble they cause is actually pretty good in terms of how it looks and how it feels. But we still have to be careful because we can create impossible results. The mesh can just end up being not quite right, which would be a little bit awkward. So, there. This is how I want the walls to feel when you're flying through them. I hope that this is clear enough. Oh, yeah. Soup of Can is saying that I'm an idiot. Yeah, yeah, I did Borg it, didn't I? Um, I could bounce it, but I'll just do it better next time. I left it on my game recording settings. So I did, in fact, cut off the sides and bottom. My bad. I'm sorry about that. You're not missing much. Um, I can try and modify this so it's the right size, though. Just drag it. That might explain why I've got no viewers. Although, obviously, I had some stupidity with me uh, spending a lot of time just doodling, but that's fine. All right, so there. That's more or less the right size. I'm sorry about that. Why didn't anybody say so? You would think that people would have noticed that earlier. I bet they did, and that's why they left. Anyway, this is the sort of experience I want on this sort of system. I want this to be a slumped over, like, this is not right sort of thing. It's not going to be something where each room looks pristine or anything like that. It's supposed to be a mess. Now, there is some damage here in terms of how the mesh is not keeping up. And that's because the Boolean modifier is not perfect, but that's fine. For the test settings, it's not a big deal. And I may do this another way when I'm creating the real version. But what we can do here is we want to add in a little bit of stuff to try and make this feel a little bit more deep. So we're going to go ahead and put in a cylinder with 16 sides. That'll do. We'll just go ahead and rotate the x-axis 90 degrees. There we are. Then scale it down, and then scale it up on the x-axis like this. Yeah, something like that. And we'll just grab it and move it. Now this pipe is something we can put in just arbitrarily to give it a little bit of depth. It doesn't really need to be carefully done or anything at this point because we're just testing. But it would be something like this, right? And then when we fly through, we'll have stuff here. It'll be scanning the rooms, and there'll be something here just to keep us awake and alert that we don't want to run into, so we'll go around it. That sort of thing is sort of what I want, so it's sort of what I'm going to aim for. Put it in one of these areas. There we are. And we also are going to want to have random pieces of debris floating. So for that, what we're going to do is just clone random faces and then rotate them. These are all triangle faces, so it's not ideal in terms of actually looking good, but I forgot that I was playing that game. I feel dumb. I streamed for 2 hours with the wrong settings. Oh well. All right, let's just go ahead and try that on for size. So when we're coming through the wall, the idea is that this is the sort of thing we'll commonly see. Let's go ahead and merge these guys in, and then duplicate it and flip it, and try and get it to feel more like what I would like it to feel like in the game, which would be like this, right? Yeah, like that. Now, if we turn on our rendering, you can see that we have the sun not doing very well. So what we're going to do is just move it to be, first off, we got to turn off the sun. The things you do when you are playing games like this. And then we're going to want to create a point light and then move it into the middle like this, just so that we have some semblance of understanding what's going on. And then we're going to want this light to be substantially larger. It's going to want to be ray shadow cast and quite large. That's a cheat that we won't be able to use in Unity, but it's pretty handy. So we'll go ahead and use it here, and we'll just upgrade the energy a little bit. And let's go ahead and just see how this sort of feels. Now, obviously, we're not getting any of the shadows right now. If we turn it to rendered mode, this is sort of how I want it to feel. Of course, you will have a light on your ship, so it's not going to be exactly like this. But the idea is that you'll be able to have this sort of experience when you're exploring inside of a ship. What do you guys think? Do you think that this would feel fun and good? Let's go ahead and turn down the light a little bit. It's a little too bright. Hello? That was weird. What's the standard light? Just inverse. That's fine. I've forgotten what it. Inverse square. There it is. That's the standard light. And we'll go ahead and make the distance 25. And then fly. Yeah, it's pretty well lit before, but this is the sort of visual I want to have when you're exploring the ship. Except, of course, I want it to look pretty. This is obviously just mocked together stuff. But I hope you can see where I'm trying to go with this. I don't know if you can, but I'm tempted to stop here just because I screwed up my stream settings for the past hour and a half. And I'm really embarrassed about that, and I'm feeling very shy. Also, I spent all of yesterday shouting. I don't know if you can hear that in my voice. And I don't know how much longer my voice is going to last. Let's go ahead and move some of these elements around a little bit to see whether or not I can create something that's even a little bit more like what I'd like to see. So we'll duplicate you, and then we'll spin you around on the x-axis 180 degrees and move you down. Trying to figure out the best way to display this part, because basically it ends. You don't want to have it so that it just goes on forever. I guess the best way to do that is to just rotate this guy. Yeah, like that. All right, like that. And then if we go into rendered mode and fly. Okay, let's go ahead and get rid of that. That's kind of just ugly. Fly! Fly, my pretties. All right, this is pretty good. This is almost exactly the sort of feel I want out of it. Aside from the, heavy pixelation. You can push through some of this debris. Clunk. Clunk. And then, when you're done, you fly back out. And you're back outside, and you look around, and over there's an engine floating. That is the basic idea. Yeah, that's going to work well. I can already tell that's going to work great. And then, of course, we're also going to have some elements where these guys are going to be pieces that are free-floating in space, and they're going to be like... I guess what I should do is just scale y as the -1. There we are. Something like that, yeah. And this is going to be like pieces floating in space, and these are going to need a little bit of effort to try and make them feel right. But basically, the idea is when they're floating in space as chunks, you're not going to have the tight configuration that you have normally. And instead, it's going to be more like... do. going to be more like this. Oh, no, not like that. And you'll be like, you'll have plenty of room because this is like a ripped apart area inside the ship, and then there's just debris floating around outside, like this. And then there'll be more different kinds of debris. It's not just that one piece, so it's, you know. Like this. But this won't have quite the same problem with the fact that it's not able to be seen by the sun. So we'll go ahead and turn the sun back on. And we'll make it so that it casts shadows. And then we'll go ahead and turn it to render mode. The problem is that it's currently facing the wrong way, so we're going to have to turn it. Like that. Now if we turn it into rendered mode, yeah. So you'd have some visuals. You'd be able to see it partially like this. I really need Eevee, the new Blender display, because this is really awful. But your ship has lights on it. And also I'll have some default lighting, because obviously there's a lot of reflected light in this situation. So you wouldn't have just a pitch black element here. Even if you did, your ship would paint it with a halo of yellow warning hazard lights if you got too close. So it would be okay. So those are the two kinds of feel that I want out of the ship proper. So if we were to hop back over here and re-experience the other one real quick. Yeah, like this. That was weird, the way that thing was always in the way. That 3D cursor is just really ugly. Try that again without the 3D cursor randomly wandering around the screen. Yeah, this is gonna be great. I can already tell that this will work if I can pull it off. If I don't suck, it'll work great. All right, so that was today, and I'm sorry that it's a little bit short and I screwed up all the settings, but I don't think anybody noticed. I mean, nobody was here. But thank you for stopping by, those of you who did, and I will see you on Wednesday. My voice should be recovered by then. I may or may not do some modeling before then. I'm trying to figure out what's up with the settings that I need to find for spherical coordinates. Because if I can find spherical coordinates, in theory, I can take the ascension and declension of the point from the center of the sphere and get like a bowed out grid. But you can see that it doesn't really work very well in some situations. It only works sometimes. And this is what you get if it's off center. So I don't really know how to make that work better. If you know anything about how to create a nice bowed out grid, then let me know so that I can do that without this nonsense happening, because it's ugly. It's really ugly. See, this is how I want it to look. Where is it? There it is. This is how I want it to look, more or less, right? And that's correct. Congratulations, me. That looks fine. But when I move it off of that plane, where am I? There I am. It starts to bow in weird ways, but that's still acceptable. It's just that when I get real bad, it just totally screws up. So if we were to move over here and get some real awkward visuals, and yeah, you can already see how that's not working out. Actually, that's not too bad, but you can see here this. It's the poles. I don't know how to deal with the poles. I can do a fine grid if I don't have to worry about the poles, but I don't know how to find a grid that is pole friendly. Of course, this is a problem that map people have had forever, so just putting it out there. If you happen to know how to make that happen, tell me so that I can put the math into my game, and I'll think about it myself as well. Thank you for the time. Sorry that I'm ditching just as some people showed up, but my voice isn't going to last any longer.